past week from the SEC and a few other conferences. I hope everybody had a great week and a great weekend. It was a fantastic week for baseball and basketball in the SEC. Kev, why don't you go ahead and lead us off with a few of the hot takes?
Yeah, and it was a great weather day today. Really nice Sunday day to do that stuff outside. College hoops this weekend was a big weekend if you look at permanent seeding. And some teams really established themselves this weekend as where their seeding will likely land. You start with Friday night. Michigan had a resounding win at Illinois. In a game that was close with about 15 minutes to go in the second half, and Michigan just executed on offense. Very long. They're a lot like Michigan. They're a very long team. And they just made it hard for them to get shot off and won by double digits. Then you get into Saturday, and there's some good games. Duke early just dominated. Bama came back to beat Tennessee. Tennessee led that game probably 33 to 35 minutes of that game. And Bama scored at the end to win by 2. One other thing to add there, Nate Amon, the outstanding freshman for Tennessee, got hurt in the first half, and that impacted that game. Then you go to Florida and Arkansas, which was last night. Florida just dominated. They scored 111 points, and it really felt like they could have scored 120. And it tied the worst loss by a non-Calipari team. He had lost it like 34-point loss. So resounding win for Florida. Then you had an interesting game yesterday with Texas Tech going into Hill Coliseum, and they're without Toppin, the former Big 12 Player of the Year, and they went in there and won, led that whole game pretty much from start to finish and won. Iowa State's first loss at home for the year. You can combine that with Tech also beating Arizona earlier this year, the only team to win at Arizona. Texas Tech has 2 of the best wins in the country. And then you finish it out with Arizona and Kansas in a game that, with again about 12 minutes to go, it was a 5-point game, and then Arizona was away and wins by 18. I think you had some teams really distinguish this week where they are in the seed line. I think you've got 5 teams battling for the number 1 seed, but I would go with these 4 as number 1s. I think you have Florida, Arizona, Michigan, Duke. I would go backwards order there. Duke would be the 1 seed, Michigan 2, Arizona 3, Florida the 4 seed. UConn would argue that they should be in there, and they did beat Florida back in December head-to-head. It's just a very different Florida team now, though. Louis Fland's the starting point guard. He was not the starting point guard when they played in December, and so I think that counts. I just think in basketball, you got to look at how teams plan towards the end of the season. So I put UConn in the 2s, and then I would also in the 2s put Houston, Iowa State, and Purdue in the 2s. Sweets, what you think about the 1s, the 2s in the game?
You know, I some great basketball this weekend. You know, Purdue, I feel like is, you know, they're kind of solidifying themselves as a 2 right now. Got a win over Ohio State, which was much needed. You know, Michigan State is starting to play a little better. They're coming on, so they're, you know, if they can get hot, I can see them moving into a 2 if they have a good tournament. You know, Duke, Michigan, Arizona, Florida are my ones as well. And depending on how the next few weeks go, you could shake those up and see how they fall. And, you know, those are the best 4 teams right now. And I'm going to tell you what, Florida is playing better ball than anybody in America right now. I love Arizona. I love Houston and Kelvin Sampson. Love Duke. You know, Shire's got those guys hitting at the right time. But Florida is just playing at another level right now. As you said, what they did to Arkansas yesterday, that was an actual clinic. I only caught probably the last 15 minutes of it. But, you know, when there's 5 minutes left in the game and the fans are already chanting to put the 7-9 kid in to get him some minutes, you know that it's the game's out of reach at that point. So that's not something you see often out of Arkansas basketball, is getting their ass whooped like that. But Florida is playing that well right now. For the twos, Houston, UConn, Iowa State, I think, like I said, Illinois and Michigan State are, depending on how they play the rest of the year, they'll be looking to sneak in there as well. There's some great basketball, and, there are a few conference tournaments. Some of the smaller conference tournaments start this week, I believe. And then the bigger ones will all go next week. So we're going to have a lot more basketball coverage as this fires up. I'm looking forward to it. Kev, anything else? Hoops?
Yeah, and you're exactly right with the threes. Michigan State and Illinois are at the top of that three line, and Michigan State could easily slide into that 2 seed, knock Purdue out of there. The threes to me are Illinois, Michigan State, Gonzaga, Nebraska. Kansas could bump into that group, but I have them in the fours. And I think you have 3 teams in this 4-seed group that could bump into the 3-seed line, and that's Bama, Kansas, and Texas Tech. Virginia, I think, is a 4. But I think you could see Gonzaga, Nebraska drop to a 4, and potentially Tech, Kansas, or Bama jump up to a 3. And honestly, I have a hard time not putting Tech in that 3-seed line with the 2 wins that they have and the 6 losses. They probably deserve to be a 3, and Gonzaga, drop down to a 4. I guess I take a little bit of consideration of the Toppins out for the rest of the year. But that being said, they have still played well. Grant McClatchy and Jeff Goodman were kind of spat back and forth. Goodman said they were a 10 seed, and all they since Toppins got hurt. All they've done since then beat Kansas State by 30 and then go on the road and Iowa State and beat Cincinnati. So 3-0 since he got hurt, with 2 really good wins and then a dominant win. So, any thoughts on 3 and 4?
Yeah, first of all, this time of year, any win is a good win. And now's not the time of year you don't want to be dropping games, especially for more so for the bubble teams than the seeded teams. You're talking about you could drop from maybe a 4 to a 6 or something like that. You're still in the show, but if you're on the bubble and you split the bid against against one of these lesser quality teams, or you get knocked out in the first round of your conference tournament, there's a good possibility that a really good basketball team will be sitting home. That's going to happen. It happens every year, but the way we've got it lined up, I can see Gonzaga. I'm not as big on them as a lot of people, so I kind of like Tech over them for a 3 seed. Illinois and Michigan State, which we spoke about earlier, those guys are right there on that 2-3 bubble for me. They could drop down as well. There's a little time left, but we're talking if we were making the seedings today. Bama's there, Nebraska, Virginia. And you talked about Kansas already. That's I like all those teams, and I think they're all most of those teams will be in the top 16 seeds come bracket time. So long as they hold serve. I see a few of them being able to move up. But like I said, if you get bit, it can also come back to hurt you and you can drop back down. The ACC is not having its strongest year, but conferences like the Big 12 and stuff are playing some good basketball right now, and it's neat to see it spread around a little bit.
I think so. And you mentioned bubble teams. I mean, right now you've got teams like Ohio State, Indiana out of the Big Ten, Auburn out of the SEC, which 2 weeks ago it looked like they would make the tournament. Right now they're around 500. So Auburn's set to the bubble. And then you got also teams like Texas A&M, Texas from the SEC that are right there to go with Auburn. So it will be interesting. Those teams got to win their games. TCU is another bubble team. New Mexico, Cal. And then if you go out west, San Diego State, USC, that are also bubble teams. Any thoughts on those bubble?
Yeah, specifically Auburn. This is a team that's sitting at 15 and 14 now. 6-10 in conference. And I don't know anybody who knows basketball that would have said, they could see Auburn sitting one game above 500 on the 1st of March. So Stephen Pearl has really struggled to gain his footing there. And I thought he'd do better, but coaching's hard, and it's not like they're playing a bunch of bum teams. They're playing quality teams. His dad didn't do him any favors with his setting up the schedule for this season outside of conference. I mean, you do what you do in the SEC, but Auburn always plays well out of conference in basketball. And, he just wasn't ready for that yet. Auburn's got a lot of talent. Let me start by saying that. I think that based on talent alone, Auburn is probably a top 20 team pretty easily. But you got to play the games, and Auburn just has struggled all year long. It's been tough to watch. I know their fans aren't happy about it, but if they could win a couple games and then win a couple games in the SEC tourney, I think that'll be enough to get them in. And if they do get in, with that talent, they can make a little noise in there.
Yeah, they could beat some.
Oh yeah,
you're right.
They certainly could. Yeah, they've got enough talent that they could compete with most teams in the country when they're on. At 15 and 14, it shows they're on to a lot of those nights this year that they have been on those. So, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out too.
You're correct though with the teams that they played out of conference. They played North Carolina State, Arizona. They've also played Purdue and Houston out of conference.
Yeah.
So they've definitely played a tough schedule. And the one thing that Stephen Pearl has struggled with is close games. When a game is really tight in that 3 minutes, he's not one to get scared of those. He's lost most of them. And then losing yesterday at home to Ole Miss, who has struggled all year. That's a tough loss. You mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
You can't lose games this time of year, especially against a team that's got a losing record. And that was a tough loss. That was one they really needed. They finish out the season. They host LSU on Tuesday night, and then they go to Bama next Saturday. They really need to win both those games, and then probably win one of those to guarantee the ticket.
I agree, and maybe 2 in the SEC tournament. I'll be honest with you. I was shocked when I read 15 and 14. I thought they were like 17 and 12. So, it's been bad, and they've been dropping a lot lately. I know they were 6 and 8 a few days ago, so they've dropped their last 2 in minimum. And these games, like LSU, is a team that Auburn should handle. Auburn shouldn't have any trouble with them. Bama's ranked, but Auburn is as talented as Alabama is. There's no question in anybody's mind that Auburn has the talent to beat Alabama, but they've got to go out on the floor and do it. Pearl's got to push the right buttons, make the right calls, and put the kids in position to do what they do best and win these games. And he's not done that so far. It's been a very disappointing winter on the Plains. I know that, and we'll see. I haven't heard any calls for his head or anything, but those Auburn fans are. If they start acting like they do in football, boy, it'll get ugly really quick there for him.
No question. That fan base is very different. So let's from there. Let's jump over to baseball. Big weekend in SEC baseball. Your thoughts on the weekend from an SEC baseball perspective?
Yeah, a great weekend for baseball. Jay Johnson, milestone, got his 200th win for LSU this weekend against Northeastern. So that's a great milestone. Not as neat as the 2 national championships, but it's still, something that you can have a little pride about. Alabama played Oregon State for the first time ever, beat them 8-7. So that was something a little new there. Georgia completed their 4-game sweep of Oakland this weekend. They got the 4-3 win today. Daniel Jackson hit 4 bombs in the series. It was a great weekend for him. Florida clinched their series today against Miami. Florida's 10, Miami's 17. Beat them 7-2 behind bombs from Jacob Kendall and Brendan Lawson. Lots of good baseball this weekend, and I'm gonna let you dig into the meteor stuff, Kev, because I know you're excited to talk about Mississippi State and UCLA and them. So go ahead and jump in, and we'll just volley back and forth.
Yeah. So Mississippi State UCLA played an outstanding game today. It was probably the best game of the early season. We thought so going into the game, and it really turned out to be that. It was 3-3 after like 6 innings, and then Mississippi State scored two. And going into the bottom of the ninth, they had a 5-3 lead. Ben Davis, who's Mississippi State's really good reliever, he did throw 3 innings today, but in the ninth he gave a 2-run homer to Rock Chowalski, best player in college baseball.
Yeah, I was gonna say this.
He came through in the clutch and tied the game. Mississippi State had a leadoff single and then a ground rule double for second and third. UCLA proceeded to get a strikeout. They walked the guy, got another strikeout, got him out to keep Mississippi State from scoring in the bottom of the ninth. So that threw the game to extra innings, and UCLA pulled it out 8-7. They scored 3 runs in the top, and then in the bottom of the inning, Mississippi State had a home run to make it 8-7 with no one out. They couldn't get another run in. UCLA, they were really good. They beat Tennessee this weekend 12-5, and they beat A&M 11-1. So they really did play well this weekend. And they're probably the best team, obviously, that win today over 14 in Mississippi State. But I just say this was Mississippi State's first loss. And they could have won the game today. They're really playing well, so they, to me, solidified themselves as one of the best teams in college baseball. So your thoughts about that game today?
Yeah, that was a fantastic game. UCLA's Will Gasparino was named the tournament MVP. He hit his 10th home run of the year. That's not a typo. That's not me giving false information. He's hit his 10th home run of the year, and what's UCLA played 11, 12 games. So he's on pace to have the greatest season in the history of college baseball if he can keep this up. I don't think he's going to, but I'll tell you what, 10 bombs in your first 3 weeks of ball is pretty good stuff. So it's not just Cholowski there at UCLA. They've got a ton of talent on that team, and that's why they are the number 1 team in the country. Mississippi State, they look like they were going to pull it out, but you've got them, second and third with no outs, and you can't get a run across. I mean, that's you got to you got to do something. You got to get the bat on the ball and make something happen. You cannot you can't go strike out, ground out, strikeout. That just, got to be better in those situations. March 1st, not the end of the world. Mississippi State let one get away today against the number 1 team in the country. But, hey, I don't think anybody's going to drop Mississippi State in their rankings for how they played against UCLA today. They proved that they're one of the best teams in the country. And, they're going to be held to deal with all season long. So looking forward to a lot of good baseball out of the Bulldogs.
I agree. You had Texas A&M. They won their opening game against Virginia Tech, and then they lost to UCLA. They're playing Arizona State right now. Shane said out what was good on Friday. Weston Monroe didn't get out of first yesterday against UCLA. So again, that puts some depth for A&M. The question mark is still there with their starters. Tennessee, they won 2 out of 3 this weekend. Again, lost to UCLA. And again, even though the score was 5, I thought Tennessee competed pretty well.
Yeah.
Then they came back to Arizona State and Virginia. So I think it was a good weekend for them. Vanderbilt would be the only team from the SEC that I would say had a really rough weekend. They lost all 3 games this weekend. They lost to Irvine on Friday. And then they lost to Oregon today. And then Arizona only had 2 wins going into the game yesterday. They lost to them. So tough loss there. And then one other team I'll mention this weekend, then we'll bounce back some more. But Auburn won 2 out of 3 against Nebraska. They lost the opening game and then came back and won the last 2 at home. So I think that's a good weekend series for Auburn. Your thought of any of those teams or any other teams you want to throw in here?
Yeah, no, Auburn's looking good. They're hitting the ball well. Texas A&M's continuing to struggle. They struggled last week against Penn, I think it was. They scored 10 runs in 3 games, and with that talent in that lineup, they should be scoring more than 10 runs against anybody over a 3-game set, much less, an Ivy League school. That's not a knock at Penn. It's just, Texas A&M is a lot better baseball team and should be scoring more. And then they came back and scored 1 against UCLA. I think they're looking a little better tonight. Had a good game against Virginia Tech. They did push 10 across against them. So coming around a little bit, but we're starting to get into it now where, over the next few weeks, these teams are going to start to, the lineups will start to get set. The coaches are seeing who these kids are now, and they've probably got a chance to be put in situations that the coaches wanted to see them put in under different circumstances. So I think that over the next few weeks, these lineups are going to start solidifying themselves, and you're going to see, you're going to see the best of the best out there, and you'll see these kids start. Their averages will start bumping up and stuff, and we'll see some good hitting baseball here. Thoughts?
Yeah, I guess the last team I would mention would be Texas. We've talked about them several times. They're just so solid.
Yeah.
Pitching wise, Rios, Harrison, and then Volantis, who pitched again today, he's as good a pitcher as in college baseball. And then their lineup, they're going to score 6 runs a game on average. They get 1 or 2 runs here, 2 more runs here. They just throughout the 9 innings, they just add runs. They just hit the ball consistent, and their pitching is as good as anybody in college baseball. So they got a sweep this weekend in the 3 teams that they play. They beat Coastal. They beat losing my train of thought.
Ohio State.
Yeah, Ohio State.
Yeah.
And so again, they proved that they're definitely a top 5 team. So I think you still have, UCLA, Mississippi State, Texas, LSU in that top 5 group. So your thoughts on Texas, LSU, anything there?
Cool little note from the weekend. Jim Schlossnagle got his 1,000th, easy for me to say, career victory yesterday over Baylor. So that's a hell of a milestone there. He's certainly going to be a Hall of Fame coach. Done a fantastic job. And Texas is as good as anybody in the country right now. They're undefeated. This week they've got Houston Christian on Tuesday, and then a 3-game set against USC Upstate. And people will laugh when they hear USC Upstate, but they've got some kids on that team who've got some talent to play some baseball. So I'd be surprised if they won a game. Don't be surprised if you see a couple of 1 or 2 run games, because they've got some good ball players, in this area of the country that just don't get noticed by some of the bigger teams. Kid might be 5'7" instead of 5'9", so he doesn't get that, that extra love from the bigger schools, but he can still hit the hell out of the ball. So, there's some talent there. They'll give Texas some competition, but right now they're, Texas is as good as anybody, and we talked about their talent, before the season, and as we've gone on, a lot of talent there. I'm just looking forward to when they get into the meat of the SEC schedule. There's going to be a lot of fun baseball this year. I'm looking forward to it.
We are, and we're only 2 weeks away from the SEC starting the season. When you're talking about conference games, your weekend conference games. So it's the pitching getting solidified. 1, 3 starters. Teams want that going into that first weekend of the SEC play. I guess the one thing that stood out to me in the LSU series this weekend is they did have good pitching. I really thought William Smith pitched his best game. 7 in the third, 4 hits, no walks, 9 strikeouts.
Yeah,
he struggled some walks in his career, not today. And if he pitches like that, he's all over the strike zone, he's going to be tough. I wouldn't be surprised if he's another Friday starter. That's not Miller or Evans at all. Smith has really good stuff. And again, I thought today was the best game that he's pitched in his career.
Yeah. The talent's always been there. I mean, this kid's been on the radar for 6 years, and he's 19 years old. So, just an ultra talented kid who's taking advantage of his opportunity. The thing I like about LSU's pitching staff right now is that the weekend starters are they're pretty solid. Like I said, I don't know that it'll be this will be the exact rotation in a few weeks, but I'm good with who they're putting out there. And can't say enough about Gavin Guidry and the job that he's done out of the pen so far this year. He looks better than he did his freshman year when he was coming out of the pen and getting guys with that hammer in the College World Series. So, to see him throwing this well I know that Jay Johnson is, over the moon with his performance so far. Just looking forward to seeing if he can stay healthy and keep it going. So, yeah.
Certainly so. So, anything else you want to close up with? I mean, obviously Tuesday we'll go over the position groups again, how we rate the top five, field pitchers, and a little more recap on the weekend stuff, and we'll talk a little bit more in the future. Anything else you want to talk about?
Well, it's March, so spring football is officially on the radar now, so we can start getting back into that, and little news and notes from some different SEC teams around the conference. What we're hearing, some scuttlebutt. Kids who just came in over the break, winter break, some true freshmen who might be looking great in practice or in the weight room or whatever. Things like that. We'll have a lot of that coming here shortly. So stick with us and stay involved, participate online, all that.
Yep. And I think again, we might get into some more discussion about the NCAA and all the rules that they're talking about. The tampering rule that we were talking about the other day. They mentioned this week that the penalties might be 6 games for the head coach to be suspended, and then also 20% of the college's budget. So we get more deeper into that Tuesday. But we'll see. But the NCAA is threatened to put some teeth into what they do. So I don't know.
That's 20% of a team's budget. That's kind of a that's a really vague number you put out there. That I don't see how they could ever figure that out. But listen, the NCAA has the rules in place. They just need to enforce them. There are rules that cover all of these issues that we're having. All the NCAA needs to do is just say, hey, this is the rule. We're enforcing it. Here's what you cannot do. That's it. Just enforce them.
And now it's like they want to play catch up with some really strong rules because they've not enforced it. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, hopefully they don't go too far over. Listen, I mean, something needs to be done, okay? But I hope this isn't a situation where they overshoot everything and make it a lot worse than it has to be. Just enforce what you have now. Okay. Just the rules are in the books. Just say, hey, this is the rule. And that's it. The one thing they need to clean up more so than two things is obviously the NIL, but these kids playing 5, 6, 7 years, that's the biggest issue. It's got to stop. I mean, it's silly. 18-year-olds should not be competing against 26-year-olds. That just shouldn't happen. And it's becoming a lot more prevalent with all these kids, going to court and just, I mean, listen, JUCO is college. So if you play 2 years of JUCO, you've played 2 years of college. That means you have 2 left, not 4 more because JUCO is not D1, not 4 more for somebody like Chambliss because Ferris State is D2, and he had a tickle in his throat one night, so he had to he should get to play that season. It's silly. They just need to enforce the rules that they have, and and it'll all work out. But until they find somebody with the intestinal fortitude to actually do that, I think I think it's just going to be a one mess after the other, as it has been.
Well, to your point, they do need to just enforce what they have. And I think the fear is maybe not the fear, but they come out at the end of the week and they threaten strong penalties. So you haven't enforced it. Now all of a sudden you have people 6 games for a head coach. That's half the season.
Oh yeah.
So is that really right? Either again, don't get me wrong. They need to do something, but they've opened Pandora's box.
Yeah. They're punishing people for their failure to enforce what they've done. We're going to make it rougher on you because we didn't do what we should have done a decade ago. So now we're really mad and we're going to make everybody, just enforce what you have now and move on. That would be the simplest thing to do. But the NCAA isn't about simple. They're about how do we make more money? And I think that's eventually going to be their downfall is that, these conferences, the SEC, I know there's been, talk about the SEC, the Big Ten, in talks about breaking off and doing their own thing. And, really, a lot of these teams don't need the NCAA for anything right now. I mean, they're not providing like leadership and guidance. and enforcement of rules and stuff like they should be doing. They're just collecting checks, and
That is all it is.
it's rough to watch. It's rough to watch, but
It is, especially when you get into this time of year, you're dealing with the portal, how ambiguous it's been for sure.
well, like I said, hopefully whatever they do is something that that lasts for a long time. That's fair. First of all, that's fair for the players, fair for everybody, all the teams, the different schools and stuff, and give college sports back to the college kids. Don't turn it into a professional game. And I think that's where we're at now. This is AAA football is what what the SEC is. It's AAA football.
It's definitely high minor. I don't even know if it's minor league. It is.
Because those AAA guys ain't making the money these a lot of these D1 players are. Not close.
No. Well, that's
in
it.
Baseball too. In baseball too.
Well, all of it. Baseball, basketball. Kentucky's got a $22 million budget for their basketball team, so I mean, it's big money. It's a different world. And I think the biggest thing is that you just hope over the next 12 to 18 months, which we hoped this a year ago, that some of this balances and gives a sustainable process to go forward. That's still what's missing. They can throw all these penalties out here. They can go suspend the coach after they can find a team. But they don't put some structure that really works for kids to go forward. More tied to revenue sharing, to where you don't have one team spending 40, 50 million, and another team spending 15, 20 million. That's not what it's about. You want to be paid. You want to be paid. Some of this is great.
Yeah, this is beyond insane, and the fact the fact that the NCAA let it get to this point is just shame on them. But to continue, the penalties and all that are meaningless. What they need to do more than anything is create a sustainable product moving forward, because you can't change what we've already done. You can penalize everybody all you want to. You can suspend a coach for a year, forfeit seasons, whatever. But at the end of the day, how is that going to affect what we do moving forward? You've showed that you would enforce a rule, okay, but how about making the rules, and enforcing them from the jump instead of waiting so long? That they've just kicked the can down the road for so many years that now they're kicking a 55-gallon drum and stubbing their toe, and it's ugly.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. Again, to everyone, like, subscribe, and we will be back Tuesday night at 8 Eastern, 7 Central, like we normally are. Appreciate everybody for watching the shorts, different things, and staying in touch with us.
It's almost here. Have a great week.